What's up, Hill City? My name is Deandra, and I'm part of the team here. If this is your first time watching with us this morning, we want to say a special thank you for taking time out of your weekend to do online church with us. We want you to know that Hill City is a safe place for you to explore your faith, so wherever you're coming from, we want to talk with you about any doubts, fears, or questions you have about Jesus. If you're new around here, we want to know who you are. Head on over to this link to fill out a connection card so we can put some names behind who's watching with us and send you some fun mail. Today is the first day that our annual share offering is open. This is an offering where we ask you to consider giving 1 day's wage, and then we give every cent away to organizations who are doing great work in our city. We know it's been a hard year for a lot of people, so if you can participate, then give what you can. You can find that offering at this link. Registrations are open for our Advent Box Challenge. This is one of the ways that we are going to anticipate Advent together as a church. So if you haven't participated in our box challenges yet, this is the month to do it. We fill a box with tools and surprises to help you focus on peace during this season, and you can do it as an individual or as a family. Find out more about it at this link. Supplies are limited, so check it out whether you're ready to think about Christmas yet or not. It's happening. Make sure to check in on Facebook this month, because for National Adoption Month, all of our check-ins donate money to Virginia's Kids Belong. That's it for me. Next up, we've got a few songs and then our very first message in our Who We Are series. Thanks so much for watching with us. I don't know where I was just backing up to just now, so where am I going?
How great the chasm that lay between us, how high the mountain I could not climb. In desperation, I turned to heaven and spoke your name into the night. Then through the darkness, your loving kindness tore through the shadows of my soul. The work is finished, the end is written. Jesus Christ, my living hope. Who could imagine so great of mercy? What heart could fathom such boundless grace? The God of ages stepped down from glory to wear my sin and bear my shame. The cross has spoken, I am forgiven. The King of Kings calls me his own. Beautiful Savior, I'm yours forever. Jesus Christ, my living hope. Hallelujah, praise the one who set me free. Hallelujah, death has lost its grip on me. You have broken every chain. There's salvation in your name, Jesus Christ, my living hope. Then came the morning that sealed the promise. Your buried body began to breathe. Out of the silence, the roaring lion declared the grave has no claim on me. Then came the morning that sealed the promise. Your buried body began to breathe. Out of the silence,
tear down the walls I built up, every wall I've built up, every wall I've built up. 'Cause you deserve every piece of my heart, every piece of my heart, every piece of my heart. And Lord, I'm trusting that you are a faithful Father, and all that you have, it is good. You're a generous giver, your love's like no other. Won't you come and break through to me over and over and over again? I am bringing my heart to you with open hands, and closer you're drawing me in, as the depths of my heart lay before you again. And over and over and over again, I am bringing my heart to you with open hands, and closer you're drawing me in, as the depths of my heart lay before you again. And Lord, I'm trusting that you are a faithful Father, and all that you have, it is good. You're a generous giver, your love's like no other. Won't you come and break through to me over and over and over again? I am bringing my heart to you with open hands, and closer you're drawing me in, as the depths of my heart lay before you again. And over and over and over again, I am bringing my heart to you with open hands, and closer you're drawing me in, as the depths of my heart lay before you again. So come, tear down the walls I built up, every wall I built up, every wall I built up. 'Cause you deserve every piece of my heart, every piece of my heart, every piece of my heart. Over and over and over again, I am bringing my heart to you with open hands, and closer you're drawing me in, as the depths of my heart lay before you again. Over and over and over again, I am bringing my heart to you with open hands, and closer you're drawing me in, as the depths of my heart lay before you again. So come, tear down the walls I built up, every wall I built up, every wall I built up. 'Cause you deserve every piece of my heart, every piece of my heart, every piece of my heart.
Hey, good morning, everybody. So good to have you with us. If this is your first time, my name is John Wagler, and I am part of this Hill City team, and so grateful you decided to watch today. We are also meeting live right now. Well, if you're watching this during the time that we're meeting live, but we're having a live meeting at 9:30 and 11 o'clock here today, and excited to gather back together, but also so grateful for technology and being able to do this and gather online. And so our hope is that Hill City becomes a place that you can call home. If Hill City is already your home, we love you and are so glad you're part of our community. We are hopping into this new series, and we're just making these 4 statements over the next 4 weeks together. The first one's called We Are Witnesses. Next week, we're going to talk about that we are people of the book. The week after that, we are generous. And then the 4th week will be We Are People that are hopeful. And so we want to take a look at this because guess what? Things are crazy, right? And so as of this filming, the presidential election has not been decided yet. Don't know if it will be by the time that this airs. Probably not, honestly, unless this airs in December. But we don't know when all that's going to happen. And this week I actually wrote a letter just for our church. And one of the things that I said was, our emotional response to all of this will mirror our trust in God. And the reason why I said that is because a lot of what's happening is important, and we get that because politics and voting and all of those things help shape how we love our neighbor well through policy. But it's also important to understand that when we pick up the Bible and begin to read it, so much of it was written underneath the rule of a tyrant or the rule of a dictator in really tough circumstances, or written from from those that were marginalized and those that hurt, or those that were in trouble, or those that were suffering, those that were in persecution. And so these words that come out of the Bible to us then should be a source of comfort and strength in the midst of times like this, and that we should then lean on. If these guys that are writing this are saying about trusting in God, then we should too, on a much deeper level. Plus, I think it's good to reflect on this time. I don't want to devalue or diminish what we're going through, but there is also just some perspective sometimes. Like if you were born in 1900, let's say, by the time you were 50 years old, 35 to 40% of your life was taken up by 2 world wars, a world pandemic that was far worse than what we're going through right now, the Great Depression, right? And incredible segregation, so many other things, like just by the time you're 50. Now, that doesn't mean that what we're going through right now isn't bad or is just easy and we should just brush it off. But again, just having perspective that people have been through really hard things before, and that people have been resilient, and that people have pushed through, and that some good has come out of this, and that even in the midst of all of this, junk that we're seeing, we've seen a lot of good. And God has been gracious, and God has been kind, and God has been present in so many ways. And so this series is going to be trying to push us and challenge us to be able to trust God on a deeper level, to be able to live our faith out, as we're going to talk about today, as an incredible witness to who God is. This virus and this pandemic and this virus and the racial tension and this political season have exposed a lot, hasn't it? You think about, it's exposed how fragile our systems are. It's exposed how individualistic we are. It's exposed how the world deems certain things important and they really aren't. It's exposed our deep need of community. It's exposed a lot of different things. And, some of that's been painful to feel and painful to see, but there's also, once we're aware of something, we can no longer be content with the way things were. There's a saying about exposure breeds discontent, and I think that's important to kind of take this in because, you just take the virus, for instance. The fact that something that's smaller than a grain of pollen and smaller than a red blood cell in your body has caused all this havoc. It shows you how little we actually control and how much we need to trust God in the midst of this. And so this exposure is a good thing in a lot of ways, even though it feels painful in the midst of going through it. And so in my lifetime, so I'll be 44 on December 9th, so put that on your calendars if you want to wish me happy birthday. But I'll be 44 in a month. And in my lifetime, I have never seen a greater opportunity for the church. In my lifetime, I have never seen an opportunity for the church to step forward as a witness to who Jesus is and have an incredible amount of impact to produce and show people what real joy is, what real purpose is, what to truly value. Like, we get to be a part of this. We get to see if, like, all right, can I be a part of what God is doing? I mean, how cool is it to be alive in a moment like this? I know so much of it is, oh, woe is me, and this stinks, and man, what about this election, all that stuff, and I get all of it, but man, what a time to be alive. Like, you get to be a part of this, a part of like what could be an incredible move of God, and he's looking for those who want to join him. He's looking for people that want to see this as like, my gosh, what an opportunity that we get to be a part of helping shape the future of our country. You know, this week I was just thinking all about this, and something that just popped into my head that I wrote down was this, that people aren't walking away from Jesus because what he taught isn't true. I rarely hear that from people. They're walking away because they don't see the value in it. You know, the reason they don't see the value in it, it reminds me of a phrase that I heard recently called thin belief. And this is the idea that we have a belief system that lacks depth. We have a belief system that enables us to be easily persuadable. We have a belief system that if we read some random blog or hear some article and don't even know if it's a bot or not, we all of a sudden believe a conspiracy theory or believe something in a complete, the system that we said we believed, and all of a sudden goes over here, and you're like a pinball machine, just going back and forth and all these things depending on what you're reading and what you're hearing that day. We have this thin belief system, and the world actually will say, we'll make the thin belief system a priority, but when we follow Jesus, it makes it that it's not a reality. That to fully follow Jesus, we want to get rid of this thin belief system. To fully follow Jesus adds a depth to who we are and enables us to truly be a witness like we should. You know, when I think about the witness and when I said earlier that people don't see the value in following Christ, the reason that thin belief comes to the forefront is because we really aren't the strong witnesses that we should be. But we could be, which is awesome, right? This is what we're going to talk about today. We could be, but right now, the church as a whole, and obviously there's some good, and some people are doing this incredibly well, but the church as a whole has lost its witness. It reminds me of this idea of being an eyewitness. A lot of times, if people think that they'd be a great eyewitness to something, that I saw something happen, and let me tell you exactly how it all went down. And the truth is the way our brains work, we're actually typically terrible eyewitnesses to things because we miss little details. And if we miss little details, our brains require stories. And when there's information missing, our brain automatically fills in what should be there to connect storylines in our heads. And so we become actually terrible eyewitnesses to things. Even recently, I was just reading about people that were exonerated from the death penalty. And since 1989, 358 people have been exonerated, okay? And on average, they spent 14 years in prison with that sentence. Do you know how they got there? 3/4 of them were put in prison by a false eyewitness. Okay, so think about that. So 3/4 of the people that ended up being exonerated, the reason they were in there was from a false eyewitness. But here's the thing that's interesting about following Jesus, though. There's this biblical term that we kind of has been around for a long period of time, and it's called the remnant. All right, it kind of sounds daunting, like the remnant. And this remnant is pretty interesting because when you pick up a Bible, even from the start, everything begins smaller. And everything begins with people that are going to be consistent, and they're going to be committed, and they're going to be passionate about who they are and what they're told to be. And this remnant then has this incredible impact. But as the group gets larger and larger and larger, that's where thin belief can start to happen. And quite often what God does is he tries to see who his remnant will be. And so we see this from the start of everything. And then all throughout the Bible, from beginning to end, you see little pockets of remnant and another remnant and another remnant, and building into something that's pretty great. You see, the remnant is just a smaller quantity or a fragment of something. And then God works through these people in a massive way. And that's what I think is happening, because even in Scripture, what we see is this: when the remnant is developed, that these people have gone through chaos, they've gone through suffering, they've gone through great loss, they've gone through a time of confusion, they've gone through periods of time underneath the rule or in an economic system or an empire or something that's persecuted them, that hasn't allowed them to fully be themselves. And part of that was brought on by who they were as people, but then other parts were just because of the tyrannical rule of someone. And so they suffered all these things. But then God says, hey, who are my people in the midst of this? The Israelites in the beginning of the Bible that we meet, they were God's chosen people. Part of their story is, God leading them out of slavery and establishing who He is, and He's their king and everything. And then there's this book called Deuteronomy. It's part of the first 5 books of our Bibles. And in this, God is talking to His people, and He says, listen, if you guys will just follow what I'm telling you to do, if you guys will be my witnesses, if you guys will love me with all of your hearts, if you guys will just be serious about being a witness to who I am, you will live long in this land and you will prosper. Okay, I get it. Live long and prosper. But you will. That's what will happen. But then they don't do that. And it's what we end up seeing, that every time that God does something like this, the people end up doing some significant things that take them away from God. And there's some indicators of what that looks like. The first thing is that they don't follow Scripture. They don't follow God's word. They kind of push it off to the side. They deem it as like a thing, and maybe there's some truth there, but it doesn't shape their lives. Another way is that we begin to see that there's a lot of nationalism or idolatry woven in together with where they are. And the third thing is that younger generations are walking away from the faith. So let me ask you something. Does that sound familiar right now? When you think about the church and you think about, Christianity, does it sound familiar that people aren't taking Scripture seriously? Does it sound familiar that this whole nationalism and idolatry woven in together, does that sound familiar? Does it sound familiar, I actually talked about last week, about younger generations walking away from the faith? And the answer is yes. So that reveals that, man, God is now saying, okay, these are indicators that you're lost. These are indicators that my people are lost. Who is going to be my remnant? And this is what He says to people in Deuteronomy 4, starting in verse 29. He says, but if from there you seek the Lord your God, you will find Him if you seek Him with all of your heart and with all of your soul. When you are in distress and all these things have happened to you, then in later days you will return to the Lord your God and obey Him. For the Lord your God is a merciful God. He will not abandon or destroy you or forget the covenant with your ancestors, which He confirmed to them by oath. And so what God is doing here is He's establishing this mindset that's like, hey, I get it. Things have gotten wild. I get it. Things have gotten chaotic. You're suffering in one way or another. But I'm telling you, if you seek me out, you will find me. And I won't forget you. If you seek me out with all of your heart and all your soul, I guarantee what will happen is you will return to me with passion. You return to me as a witness to who I am. You return to me in obedience, and you will know that I will never abandon you. I will never forsake you. I will never destroy you. I will never forget the promises that I've put out to you. But He's just looking for people to stop being just like an eyewitness and be a real witness. You see, the way that they did it back then was they had all this tangible evidence that they were a witness to who God was, that this remnant of people, it was through circumcision. Okay, so that was one way. That was very obvious. There were festivals. There were holy days. There were generational stories. There were altars that they built. Of course, they got to the temple at one point. That became a really big thing. And so there were all these tangible ways for them to tap into the stories and the promises and remembering who God is in the midst of all the chaos and the suffering. And that when that happened, they came back to God. And when they did that, man, those promises became true. And God, we could trust in who God was because He did not abandon them. He did not destroy them. He did not forget them because He's a merciful God. And the same holds true for us today. Now, let me also say this about a remnant. A remnant is not a perfect grouping of people. They're flawed. They've gone through a lot, but they cover each other up too because they're what? They're together. And this is what God is seeing, or what God is desiring for us right now. Can He find a remnant of people who really want to be His witnesses? Can He do it? Do you want to be a part of that? The main idea here this morning is simply this, that a remnant is a committed group of people who become a witness to the faithfulness and love of God through the renewal of their hearts. Now, for our hearts to be renewed, we have to be wide open to what God wants us to do. For our hearts to be renewed, we can't be distracted by all of this stuff around us. For our hearts to be renewed, we have to have ultimate trust in God to be part of his people. When I was thinking about this as it began to happen throughout Scripture and the church was built in the early church, I remember reading this article by Tim Keller, who's kind of one of the best theologians that we've had in modern history. He's up there anyway. And he talked about the early church distinctives. And I think it's important for us to kind of look at these because they help us frame what the remnant begins to look like. He says these 5 things were prevalent in the early church that were distinctives because they were the remnant of God. They were witnesses of God. The first thing is that they were multi-ethnic, all right? Multi-ethnic. There was this unity among racial lines. There was this unity in every grouping of people, that their groups had the richest of the rich to the poorest of the poor, and they were all together. And then that they were doing things in the early church that we are horrible at right now. And so that they were bringing people together all the time. There were, again, different races, different perspectives, different married and single, kids, whatever. Like all of these things were lumped, and there was a unified effort to all of it. And guess what? All of those people brought different perspectives. All of those people brought different ideas. All of those ideas, you had different political opinions or whatever. But that became a huge part of the early church. Another thing that we see here is they were focused on forgiveness and reconciliation. All right? Reconciliation. Forgiveness and reconciliation. Even Jesus taught, a lot of times when he teaches, if you watch how he talks about forgiveness, he also talks about healing in the same sense, that there's this idea of forgiveness and healing come together that allow reconciliation to happen. Paul in 2 Corinthians talks about that, hey, we're supposed to be essentially agents of reconciliation for God, that those that are actually witnesses to who Jesus is and what Jesus did on that cross and how we're supposed to do what he taught, that we become agents of reconciliation, and that becomes our heartbeat and everything. The third thing Keller says is about hospitality, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. Hospitality there. The fourth thing is sanctity of life. All right. Fourth thing is sanctity of life. All right. Now, abortion was very rare back then because it was so incredibly dangerous. So what they would do is infant exposure. And what that meant was when a woman had a child, they would, if they didn't want the child, they would just put the baby out on a sidewalk and let it die. But what Christians came actually to do is they said, no. They would believe the word of Psalm 139, what David says, like, no. That the child, that child right there was life in your womb. And we're going to protect that life not only in the womb, but we're protecting that life outside of the womb right here. So we're going to take up that child and adopt it or foster it or whatever. And then we're going to do that. And then we're also going to take care of that mother. Okay, so the sanctity of life was very prevalent in that early church. And then they were, this is a big one too. The last one is this, that their sexual ethic was counter-cultural. All right. So that a countercultural sexual ethic, and the way that they talked about the fact that we are not just a product of our desires, right? We aren't just because you desire something doesn't mean that you can do it, right? That we are, we think about marriage very differently. And so we begin to think about self-control differently. So they really amped up the sexual ethic in a way that was a very large distinctive. And so this is what we begin to see in the early church. And those are the people that were closest to Jesus and what they established. And what's fascinating about all of this, you don't see all of these encompassed in right or left right now in our culture, right? Why? Because again, as we talked about in the last series, that what Jesus does is outside of what culture has to offer. So this early church began to happen. And so what I want us to do is take a look at a few characteristics that we find that this guy named Peter lists out. Peter is one of the early believers, right? So Peter was not a perfect person. Peter denied Jesus. Peter was called Satan by Jesus at one point, but Peter became one of the fathers of the early church. And what he did was he wrote some letters to help the early Christians gain wisdom That's what the world needed then. That's what the world needs now. How to gain wisdom to what it means to be a faithful witness to who Jesus is. And so he writes this in 1 Peter 4, starting in verse 7. He says this. He says, "The end of all things is near. Therefore, be alert and sober-minded so that you may pray." That's an interesting part that we're going to talk about. "Above all, love each other deeply because love covers a multitude of sins. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling." We're not complainers. "Each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. If anyone speaks, they should do so as one who speaks the very words of God. If anyone serves, they should do so with the strength God provides, so that in all things God may be praised through Jesus Christ. To him be the glory and the power forever and ever. Amen." So I want to highlight a few characteristics that Peter is talking about here that I think are critical for our understanding of what it means to be a faithful witness and how to be a part of the remnant, and ties into even what Pastor Tim Keller listed out earlier. So here's some characteristics that I want us to just jot down. So take notes on these and begin to think through, okay, is this me? The first thing that Peter talks about is to be alert and sober-minded. All right, alert and sober-minded. Now, if you have ever had a little too much to drink, you know that you don't make great decisions in those moments. You might say, yeah, but I had so much fun during that time, but you weren't making good decisions. And so you know that in the midst of that, being sober-minded, in order to have wisdom, you have to be sober-minded. But the sober-mindedness is actually bigger than just simply what you have in your body. It's actually what's going on in your head. You know, what's interesting about what Peter says is that when we're not sober-minded, we can't pray correctly. So he's saying these distractions that can come in, whether it's wealth, greed, or pride, or nationalism, or things around politics, or sex stuff, or whatever, things that can get you're not thinking straight in the midst of this, that you actually won't pray correctly. And so even when you begin to think about what we just went through right now, it's fascinating to me because, there were people who wanted Biden to win that were praying for Biden to win, and people that wanted Trump to win that were praying for Trump to win. Think about this for a second, that we had Christians or people who call themselves Christians praying for a specific candidate to win in opposition of other Christians in prayer. We can't even be united in prayer right now. Do you know why? Because we aren't sober-minded about things. We've elevated things too high, and we're lacking the wisdom of God even in our prayers. But to be sober-minded is to take a step back and say, hey, am I really praying for the things of God? And that when Christians really do kind of step back and be like, when I really want the things of God to come and for God's will to be prevalent in our culture and in my life, then guess what? Our prayers will resonate with that. And my prayers will sound like your prayers about what we want for everyone. This idea about being sober-minded is to be aware. It's to be people of confession, of repentance, people that are intently focused on Scripture, which we'll talk about next week. But that allows us to stay sober-minded in the midst of this. The second thing that Peter points out is that we have to have a deep love. All right, a deep love. Now, this love, he says, covers a multitude of sin, which means that it doesn't mean you're hiding sin. It just means that when people love each other deeply and there's some kind of sin coming out of someone who's not doing things the right way, the love that they have for each other, what builds that person up, encourages that person, challenges that person to stop making those decisions. And so that love covers that. And that sin, whatever that sin is, then begins to go away because the immense love that they feel around and the one another's. But we can't do that when we're constantly like chirping at each other or trying to hurt each other or divided against each other. But the loving one another covers these things. The loving one another adds grace into all this. The loving one another says, hey, listen, I love you so much. I'm not going to let you stay where you are. And so that love begins to challenge, the love begins to overcome, the love begins to right wrongs, right? Even this idea of a deep love of one another, when I said earlier that one of the indicators of not following God is that younger generations are walking away. And so when we think about our, even our church communities, that there should be this attachment of each generation to one another, that the older generations that are looking at the younger generations coming behind them and then encouraging and leading them well, giving them wisdom, but bringing them up, allowing them to explore and innovate and all of these things and make whatever happened before even better. The younger generations are looking to the older generations in honor and respect and wanting and desiring to learn from what came before them. So often what we see, though, is there's this, sometimes the older generations are I don't know, they look at younger generations and they're like, oh man, you guys are so foolish. And younger generations are looking at older generations like, oh, you're so outdated, right? That's kind of the feel that ends up happening. That shouldn't be when we love each other deeply. Here's a reality that we've all got to come to grips with, is that in every generation, there are horrible atrocities and horrible things. And listen, if you're part of Gen X, which I am, or the Boomer generation, you have to look at what has happened over time and say, you know what? Actually, in my childhood or when I was growing up, there were horrific things that happened. When I was a teenager, I might not have been a full-blown racist, but my gosh, I didn't do anything to stop it. I didn't do anything to speak against it. I didn't love people the right way. Even the way my brain was shaped by people and everything, like that wasn't good. But it doesn't mean your whole generation was bad. There's a lot of good there, a lot of great there. In the same way, if you're younger and you're looking at what's happening right now in our country and you're just looking to the past all the time and all you do is demean what happened before you, guess what? Your children are going to do the same thing about your generation. They're going to look at your generation and they're going to say, you did what? You allowed what to happen? You guys were crazy. And so it's important then to also then look at, but there's a lot of good happening right now. And so for everyone, we've got to begin to look at each other and say to love and care for each other deeply is recognizing what was not good, but then encouraging one another in what is good and building on that. That's what a deep love for one another looks like. A deep love for one another, too, is to have that. We can't just be transparent. We have to be vulnerable. See, to be transparent is to just list out facts of things that are going on with yourself. You're like in telling stories. But to be vulnerable is to be open in a way that could cause you to be hurt. Okay, and so I wrote it down this way. I just said that vulnerability is opening up with the possibility of getting hurt. And so it's important for us to then have this framework of like, we want to be a group that's vulnerable, a group that loves each other so deeply, so that what ends up happening, what Peter says, that this hospitality happens without complaining, without grumbling. So instead of looking at each other and be like, oh, you're this, oh, you're younger, or you're older, or you're Republican, you're Democrat, or whatever, I don't want you in my home. I don't want you part of my community. I don't want you. No. We have this incredible hospitality to everyone. Why? Because of this deep love of one another. It's not just opening up our homes. It's opening up our hearts to be hospitable. It's opening up our churches to be hospitable. It's partnering with organizations that are doing great work. Why? That's a part of being hospitable to those that are hurting. It's backing policies and laws and stuff that are show great hospitality to those that are hurting. The third thing that we see here that's important is to use your gift. All right, or gifts. And what Peter says is you have to discover your gift, but then you have to use it. We spend a lot of time discovering things about ourselves and getting self-clarity, and that is incredibly important. But then we have to do stuff with all of it. To not do things with our gifting that God has given us is to dishonor God. And so what ends up happening is what Peter's kind of pushing in on here in verses 10 and 11. He says, when we use our gifts, we are faithful. So that means when we're not using our gifts to serve others, we are not being faithful to God. When we're not using our gifts to serve others, then God is not going to be glorified in the way that he should be. And so the responsibility of the remnant, the responsibility of the witnesses of who Jesus is, use their gifts passionately. Jesus says it this way in Matthew 9. He says, in starting verse 37, he says to the disciples that the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. And then he says this, ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. It's funny. Jesus says, you know what you should be praying for? People to get off their butts and do work. People to stop talking, to actually be people who serve others, people who are generous, people that are committed to what they're doing. Like, that's what he says we need to do. Instead of just like, man, God, would you send a miracle? And we should pray for miracles. Like, I'm all for miracles. But we often rely on just simply praying for, like, could someone else do something? God, would you just send a supernatural miracle? When Jesus says here, he goes, no. The harvest is plentiful, but I'm just looking for people to actually get up and do something. We see this all the time, right? When someone says, I'm voting a certain way throughout this election. I voted this way because I'm passionate about whatever the cause is. And then you're like, okay, well, how much time did you spend serving with that organization? Oh, none. Oh, how much money did you give to that? Oh, none. Oh, you just kind of tweeted about it, or you liked the comment or whatever. Oh, so you're super passionate about it, right? Like, so my point is that what Jesus is saying, if we say we're Christians, and it's a label that we take on, if we say we're Christians, then we should be passionate about it. That we shouldn't be just praying for miracles. We, as like our own prayers, and the only thing we pray for, we should pray for those things again. But we've got to start thinking like, no. We should be doers of everything, doers of the word, and doers of the things that we actually say we believe in. I said it this way: we can't experience the kingdom of God eternally unless it's in us presently. That's what Jesus is actually speaking into right now. And here's the fourth thing that is important that Peter lists out, that we have godly speech. Godly speech, all right? So he says that we should speak as if we are literally saying the words of God. And it's interesting, I was thinking about how much wisdom the world needs around our words. Proverbs 24:9, it talks about how a mocker or a scoffer, and that's the mockers and scoffers are people who just hold a lot of contempt for others. They devalue others' opinions. They are disagreeable all the time. They cause a lot of division. They cause a lot of hatred. They're trying to stir the pot, stir up conflict all the time. These are mockers and these are scoffers. And what Solomon says, or the writer of Proverbs 24 says in verse 9, he says that those people are an abomination to others, that they are detestable to others. But I started thinking about this. How often do we as Christians elevate scoffers and mockers? If we are giving views and stuff to some of these people on news and social media and stuff like that, some of these people are just angry. They're just divisive. And sometimes they even say something that's right, but they're doing it to demean other people. And we're elevating all these people, allowing them to shape our minds. And that is bringing in all the division and the hate and all of that stuff. And what Peter says is here that, man, our words that we value, that come out of our mouths and that we hear from others and elevate, our words should be like the words of God, that we should have godly speech in everything that we do. We are not a source of anger or hatred towards the world. We are witnesses of God's love towards it. For God so loved the world that he gave. And that is our posture as well. And Peter ends, he actually, there's a few more verses after this, but I just want to highlight one more verse. He says, "Dear friends," this is verse 12, "do not be surprised." I'm going to highlight that. "Do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal that has come on you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you." And this is why I think this is important. I want to end with this. What is happening all around us through this virus, through racial tension, through all this political dumpster fire things that we see? It's a test for who we are. I'm not saying God brought on all of it, but in the midst of this, this is a test. Who are you in the midst of this? Are more things of who God is coming out of us or less? Are we trusting in God more or less? Is our emotional state and our fear and our worry heightened, or are we turning to God in the midst of it? This is a test. And what Peter's saying is here, this suffering that may come on you, and sometimes that suffering, that persecution comes on because you're claiming the name of Jesus. And what he would say is we're blessed when that happens. But then sometimes what he says in verse, I think it's 14, afterwards he goes, now this is my translation, but if you're a jerk and you get persecuted, there's no blessing in that. Like, you're just bringing on that stuff on your own. But listen, in the midst of all of this is a test of who we are. Are we actually witnesses to the love of Christ? Are we actually witnesses into what it means to trust Jesus? Are we actually witnesses and faithful witnesses with tangible things coming out of us to be the remnant that God desires? Are we witnesses to all that God can do to speak into this? Because again, this is an incredible time to be alive. There's so much opportunity if we'll just step into it. There's so much opportunity if we would just say, you know what, God, I'm in. I'm seriously in, and I'm going to be consistent, and I'm going to be committed in the love that comes around us in community. And we're going to cover each other and be gracious to one another in the times that we fall and all that stuff. But man, the love that covers the multitude of sins. But man, when God's people move forward, God, his light will shine into the darkness. And Peter ends in 1 Peter 4, he ends it and he says, listen, this label that you carry, what a gift. If you say you're a Christian, that is a label that you carry. What a gift to bear the name of Jesus. So do you take that seriously enough? To bear the name of Jesus, to be a witness of what he taught. Let's pray. God, my hope is that we'll just be excited instead of just so miserable and so sad and so downtrodden about everything, that we have a sense of excitement. I get grieving and I get mourning and I get all of those things. I'm not ignoring those things. I'm just saying that in our hearts and in our mindsets that there would be this joy in the midst of pain, that there would be this excitement in the midst of trial and testing, that we would want to be witnesses for you, and that through that we will know what love really looks like. Through that, others around us, the world around us will be like, oh, that's what I need to get out of this. That through that, this thin belief stuff begins to go away, and for a deep sense of conviction of who you are. But that can only happen when we choose to be a real, tangible witness of what you taught and who you are in your death and resurrection. And so, God, we're just so thankful for your message and for your hope and for all that it means. And in your name, amen. So here are a couple of questions for you guys to talk about. What has this test revealed about your faith? It's something that you can discuss with people you're around right now or just take notes in your own journal. But what has this test revealed about your faith? And the second one, does your public witness provide evidence of what Jesus taught? Does your public witness provide evidence to what Jesus taught? And that could be at work, that could be at family, that could be within the church. Okay, I want to end with this. And, I said each week we've been talking about this share offering that just opened up today. And some of you guys know what the share offering is, some of you guys don't. But this is one of the more important things that we do as a church every single year, because what we do is we partner with some incredible organizations. This year, there's more than just these, but this year it's Virginia Kids Belong, it's For Richmond, it's Camp Hope, it's Feed More, it's Extra Mile Pediatrics, it's RJI, it's the Pregnancy Resource Center, it's Arabon. These are all organizations that are doing things around foster care, adoption, working with underprivileged kids, working for different educational opportunities within our city, and also gathering pastors and helping cultivate right relationships within churches. We're talking about feeding people, helping people internationally, helping kids internationally. We're doing stuff with trying to help prevent sex trafficking. You got stuff around sanctity of life with the Pregnancy Resource Center. So there's a lot of different things happening. We have even more than this, but the more money that comes in, the more that we can do. But what ends up happening in this every year is we decide, okay, we want everyone to think through what does it mean to go above and beyond to sacrifice. So my hope is that 100% of us consistently give, whatever that is for you, whatever that percentage is of your income, that you do that on a regular basis. And then this is a plus to this. So again, I'll just use an example for us. We have an amount that we give as a family, and then we are deciding, all right, we're going to give this amount to the share offering. And then everything that comes in for the share offering is going out. Every single cent that comes in will go out to all these organizations to make an incredible difference. And so this allows us to be a tangible witness into our community that, yep, there's all this craziness going on, but guess what those Hill City folks did? They gave away hundreds of thousands of dollars to help all these organizations do a great work in our city. And so that is open right now. You can see that on the pull-down menu there when you go to give. And so I just want to encourage you guys to be a part of this. I don't care if it's $10, if it's $50, if it's $100, or however much you can give. Some of you guys can't give anything because it's been a rough season. I understand that. Some of you guys have flourished in this season, and you got to go above and beyond. So I would just challenge us to be regular givers, consistent givers, and then to go above and beyond with all of this together and watch what God will do. I love you guys. Thank you so much. And we will see you all next week.
Thanks so much for being a part of this morning. If you're out there and have questions, prayer needs, or want to talk to someone about next steps in your faith, then head on over to this link. We'll see you guys next week.